Many older men are often unaware of the subtle ways in which women signal interest. These signals are rarely overt. They are nuanced, indirect, and often disguised as ordinary conversation. Women tend to use socially acceptable methods to engage, such as asking questions that appear casual or informative, but carry a deeper relational meaning. For a man who is not attuned to these cues, these moments may pass unnoticed, interpreted simply as polite interaction rather than an invitation to connect. This lack of awareness often stems from reliance on outdated social scripts or generational differences in communication. What a younger person might recognize as curiosity or playful engagement may seem inconsequential to someone who interprets interactions through a more literal lens. Developing the ability to notice these subtle cues requires attentiveness, reflection, and an openness to perceiving relational intention beneath surface-level communication. A common method women use is the question. Questions are inherently non-threatening, offering a safe way to initiate interaction without putting themselves in a vulnerable position. Women may ask about opinions, perspectives, or personal experiences, which at first glance seems like general curiosity. However, these inquiries are often layered. On one level, they provide information. On another, they are a test of engagement and responsiveness. For men who overlook this relational dimension, the opportunity to respond meaningfully is missed. The key is not to overthink or assume complexity where there is none, but rather to notice the pattern and intent behind these questions. Recognizing that a question can be relational allows men to engage thoughtfully, demonstrating presence and curiosity in response. The challenge lies in noticing patterns rather than isolated instances. One question does not necessarily indicate interest. It is the repetition and context that reveal the underlying intention. Women may consistently inquire about personal values, hobbies, preferences, or even hypothetical scenarios, gradually building a sense of connection and shared understanding. This pattern signals that the woman is assessing compatibility and seeking relational resonance. Men who fail to observe these patterns may misinterpret these questions as mere social pleasantries, missing an opportunity to engage in a meaningful and authentic way. By practicing mindfulness and observation, men can become more attuned to these cues, responding with genuine curiosity and attentiveness. Understanding these subtle forms of communication requires emotional intelligence. It is not enough to hear the words. One must also interpret tone, context, and nonverbal cues. Questions that may appear neutral can carry warmth, interest, or even playful challenge, providing insight into the speaker's intentions. Older men often underestimate the complexity of this interplay, focusing on content rather than relational nuance. By cultivating emotional awareness, men can navigate these interactions with sensitivity, respond appropriately, and build connections that are authentic and reciprocal. In doing so, they not only recognize signals of interest, but also enhance their own relational intelligence, improving the quality of their social interactions and relationships. Questions that signal interest are often framed around seeking opinions or advice. At first glance, these questions might appear ordinary or informational, yet they carry an underlying relational purpose. Women frequently ask questions not only to gain insight, but to subtly create a bridge for connection. By inquiring about your experiences, perspectives, or values, they open a space for conversation that reveals compatibility and shared interests. Many older men overlook this layer because they assume a question is purely functional, meant only to gather information. This limited interpretation prevents them from noticing the relational intent embedded in everyday conversation. Recognizing that questions often carry emotional and social significance allows men to respond with thoughtfulness rather than defaulting to routine or transactional answers, which enhances both mutual understanding and engagement. The way questions are framed can be very telling. They often involve topics that invite reflection, discussion, or sharing personal narratives, such as asking about your opinion on a recent experience, your perspective on a common challenge, or how you approach certain situations in life. While these may seem neutral or casual, they function as subtle probes that help the woman assess compatibility, attentiveness, and emotional intelligence. For men unaware of this dynamic, the true meaning behind these questions remains hidden, and their responses may appear disinterested or superficial. By recognizing these inquiries as relational cues, men can respond in ways that demonstrate genuine curiosity, empathy, and engagement, which in turn encourages reciprocal communication and deeper connection. Patterns in questioning are crucial to understanding intent. One isolated question rarely signals interest. However, a consistent pattern of asking personal or reflective questions often does. Women may repeatedly ask about your opinions, past experiences, or hypothetical situations as a way to explore relational alignment without overtly expressing interest. These questions are a safe method to gauge receptivity, build rapport, and create a sense of emotional safety within the conversation. Older men who fail to notice these patterns may misinterpret curiosity as simple politeness, thereby missing the opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue. Awareness of these patterns allows men to participate more consciously, creating space for authentic connection and mutual understanding. Responding effectively to these questions requires more than simply providing an answer. It requires presence, thoughtfulness, and emotional attunement. Recognizing that a question is relational rather than purely informational allows men to engage with nuance and depth. It is not about over-analyzing or performing. Rather, it is about responding authentically while acknowledging the intent behind the inquiry. Men who cultivate this awareness develop stronger relational intelligence, which enhances their social interactions and overall communication skills. By listening actively and responding with attention, men not only recognize subtle interest signals, but also foster interactions that are meaningful, reciprocal, and grounded in mutual respect. Attention to patterns in communication is essential for understanding subtle social cues. A single question or comment may appear casual, but when repeated over time, it can reveal genuine interest. Women often use repeated inquiries about personal experiences, preferences, or opinions as a way to gauge relational alignment. This method allows them to assess compatibility, empathy, and attentiveness without overtly expressing interest. Older men frequently overlook these patterns, assuming each question is independent rather than part of a larger relational strategy. By noticing consistency in the types of questions asked and the topics explored, men can develop a more accurate understanding of social intent. Recognizing these patterns requires mindfulness, an observant mindset, and the ability to separate surface-level content from underlying relational motivation. Patterns are particularly revealing when they involve personal, reflective, or hypothetical topics. Questions such as inquiries about life choices, preferences, or hypothetical scenarios are rarely accidental. They serve a dual purpose. They allow women to learn about the person they are engaging with and simultaneously signal curiosity and interest. Men who fail to observe these patterns often interpret them as routine conversation or casual politeness. The subtle repetition of relationally oriented questions is a low-risk strategy women use to explore potential connection, giving men the opportunity to engage thoughtfully and authentically. Understanding that patterns, not isolated moments, convey relational intent is key to developing stronger social and emotional awareness. Observing patterns also enhances emotional intelligence. When men recognize that repeated questions or conversational themes are intentional rather than coincidental, they can respond in a way that demonstrates attentiveness, empathy, and curiosity. Women often look for relational attunement in these interactions, which is signaled by a thoughtful response, active listening, and engagement that goes beyond the superficial level. Men who miss these patterns may inadvertently send signals of disinterest or detachment, thereby limiting potential connection. Developing the skill to detect and interpret patterns strengthens relational intelligence and creates opportunities for deeper, more meaningful interactions. Finally, awareness of patterns in communication encourages a proactive, mindful approach to social engagement. Men who are attuned to repeated questions, consistent topics, and the ways in which conversations are framed can respond more authentically and constructively. This is not about overanalyzing or performing. It is about noticing relational intent and engaging in ways that reflect emotional awareness and attentiveness. Over time, the ability to observe patterns fosters stronger, more reciprocal relationships as it allows men to respond with insight, presence, and relational sensitivity. Recognizing and respecting these cues ultimately builds trust, encourages authentic dialogue, and improves overall social intelligence, making interactions more rewarding and meaningful. Body language and verbal cues work together to provide context for understanding subtle social signals. A question on its own may appear neutral, but when paired with nonverbal behavior, it can reveal interest or curiosity. Women often accompany questions with gestures, tone changes, or eye contact that convey warmth, attentiveness, or engagement. These nonverbal cues provide an additional layer of information, helping to clarify intent in ways that words alone cannot. Older men often focus solely on the content of a question, missing the relational dimension embedded in body language. Developing awareness of both verbal and nonverbal signals allows men to interpret interactions more accurately and respond in ways that demonstrate understanding and emotional presence, enhancing the quality of their social engagement. Subtle nonverbal behaviors are often consistent and meaningful. Eye contact, facial expressions, posture, and the way a person positions themselves in conversation can all serve as indicators of relational interest. For example, a woman who leans in slightly while asking a question or maintains gentle eye contact may be signaling attentiveness and engagement. Vocal tone also plays a role. Slight variations in pitch or emphasis can signal curiosity or warmth. Men who fail to integrate these cues with the verbal content of a conversation may misinterpret interest as casual conversation or routine social interaction. By consciously observing these patterns, men can gain insight into the relational intentions behind questions and respond in ways that foster authentic connection. Understanding the interplay between verbal and nonverbal communication requires emotional intelligence. It is not enough to hear words. One must also interpret context, gestures, and tone to fully understand the meaning behind them. Older men often underestimate this complexity, treating conversations as purely informational exchanges rather than as layered social interactions. Recognizing that questions are embedded within a web of nonverbal signals allows men to respond with sensitivity and thoughtfulness, reflecting both attentiveness and emotional awareness. This skill enhances relational competence, improves the accuracy of social interpretation, and allows men to navigate interactions with more confidence and clarity. Integrating verbal and nonverbal cues also promotes relational responsiveness. When men notice the subtleties in how questions are asked, they can respond in ways that build rapport, trust, and connection. Active listening, thoughtful engagement, and attention to context allow men to participate authentically, demonstrating empathy and awareness. This approach encourages reciprocal interaction and signals that the man is present and attuned to the dynamics of the conversation. Over time, the ability to combine these insights strengthens social intelligence, allowing men to interpret interest accurately, respond with relational sensitivity, and create interactions that are meaningful, respectful, and mutually rewarding. Context matters more than the words alone when interpreting subtle social signals. A question asked in a relaxed social environment may carry a completely different meaning than the same question in a professional or transactional setting. Women often calibrate their questions based on context, using casual inquiries to gauge receptivity, explore compatibility, and build rapport. Older men frequently overlook this nuance, applying a uniform interpretation to every interaction without considering situational factors. By paying attention to timing, setting, and previous exchanges, men can begin to understand the relational intent behind questions. Recognizing context helps transform ordinary conversations into opportunities for meaningful connection, allowing men to respond thoughtfully rather than mechanically. Situational awareness is essential for interpreting relational cues. Questions asked during shared leisure activities, social gatherings, or private moments are often intended to foster connection and reveal personal insights. Conversely, similar questions in professional or transactional settings may genuinely be information-seeking without relational undertones. Older men who do not account for context risk misreading intent, either over-interpreting casual conversation or missing genuine signals of interest. Developing the ability to differentiate between environments and social norms allows men to respond appropriately, signaling attentiveness while respecting boundaries. This awareness strengthens both confidence and relational intelligence, making interactions more nuanced and responsive. Patterns in context-specific communication further clarify intent. Women may repeat certain types of questions or initiate discussions that gradually reveal their curiosity or desire for connection. Observing where and how these questions occur provides insight into relational dynamics. Older men often neglect this layer of analysis, focusing only on the words themselves rather than the broader social and emotional landscape. Recognizing patterns in context enables men to respond in a way that balances engagement with respect for boundaries. By noting consistent behaviors in particular settings, men can discern relational signals with greater accuracy, fostering trust, mutual respect, and authentic interaction. Ultimately, understanding context requires a combination of emotional intelligence and mindful observation. Men who integrate situational awareness with attentiveness to verbal and nonverbal cues are better equipped to interpret subtle relational signals accurately. This is not about overanalyzing or projecting assumptions. It is about observing carefully, responding thoughtfully, and creating space for authentic engagement. By appreciating how context shapes communication, men can interact in ways that demonstrate presence, empathy, and relational sensitivity. Over time, this ability strengthens social competence, enhances connection, and allows men to recognize and respond to interest in a manner that is both appropriate and meaningful. Emotional intelligence is central to understanding subtle signals of interest. Men who develop the ability to perceive emotional cues, tone, and relational subtleties are far more capable of recognizing when a question is more than just informational. Women often ask questions not only to learn facts, but also to assess the emotional presence, empathy, and attentiveness of the person they are engaging with. Older men, particularly those who rely heavily on logical or transactional interpretations of interactions, may overlook these layers entirely. Developing emotional literacy allows men to respond thoughtfully, demonstrating curiosity, presence, and relational awareness, rather than giving surface-level or automatic answers that fail to recognize the underlying intent. Emotional intelligence involves more than simply noticing nonverbal cues. It also encompasses the ability to interpret tone, pacing, and nuance in conversation. A question that might appear casual can carry warmth, subtle humor, or an invitation to deeper engagement when interpreted through an emotionally intelligent lens. Older men often focus exclusively on content, failing to integrate these subtle emotional cues into their understanding of the interaction. By cultivating the ability to perceive and interpret emotions, men can respond in ways that feel authentic, reflective, and attentive, signaling awareness and respect for the relational dynamics at play. This fosters stronger connection and builds trust in social interactions. One important aspect of emotional intelligence is recognizing the relational purpose behind repeated or reflective questions. Women may employ these questions to gauge compatibility, assess values, or explore shared interests without overtly stating their intentions. Men who are attuned to these signals can respond in ways that demonstrate not only comprehension of the question, but also sensitivity to the relational context. This creates an environment of reciprocal engagement where both parties feel heard, validated, and understood. Conversely, men who lack emotional attunement may misinterpret curiosity as casual conversation, potentially missing opportunities to foster meaningful connections. Cultivating emotional intelligence requires practice, self-awareness, and mindfulness. Men must learn to observe patterns in behavior, recognize subtle shifts in tone or demeanor, and consider the broader relational context of questions. It is not about overanalyzing or performing, but about being present and attentive, responding in ways that convey understanding, interest, and respect. Over time, this skill enhances social awareness, strengthens relational competence, and allows men to interpret signals of interest with clarity and confidence. Emotional intelligence, therefore, becomes a critical tool for navigating subtle relational cues, fostering authentic connection, and engaging in meaningful interactions that are mutually rewarding and respectful. Self-reflection is a vital tool for recognizing subtle social cues that indicate interest. Many men overlook these signals because they interpret interactions primarily through the lens of their own assumptions and past experiences. Our perceptions are influenced by cognitive biases, social conditioning, and internalized scripts about how people, especially women, should communicate interest. By engaging in intentional self-reflection, men can identify these biases and recognize when they are projecting their own assumptions onto neutral interactions. This allows them to separate personal preconceptions from actual behavioral cues, creating a clearer understanding of social dynamics and relational intent, which is essential for authentic connection. Reflecting on one's past interactions can reveal patterns that might otherwise go unnoticed. For example, a man might realize that he has consistently misinterpreted certain types of questions or engagement as neutral or casual when, in fact, they carried relational significance. Self-reflection involves pausing to consider why a particular interaction felt ambiguous, what emotional or nonverbal signals were present, and how one's response may have influenced the outcome. This process encourages mindfulness and greater awareness, allowing men to become more attuned to the subtleties of conversation, recognize genuine interest, and respond with greater empathy and intentionality in future interactions. Another aspect of self-reflection is examining one's own emotional reactions to social cues. Often, men may feel uncertain, anxious, or defensive when interpreting indirect signals. These emotions can cloud judgment and lead to misinterpretation. By observing these internal responses, men gain insight into how their emotional state affects perception and can begin to adjust their mindset. Understanding one's internal reactions, combined with careful observation of external cues, allows for a more accurate interpretation of relational signals. Over time, this practice strengthens emotional literacy and social awareness, equipping men to respond in ways that are measured, thoughtful, and relationally intelligent. Self-reflection also supports the development of relational awareness over time. It encourages men to question assumptions, recognize blind spots, and approach social interactions with curiosity rather than judgment. By cultivating a habit of introspection, men can identify the subtle ways in which women communicate interest through questions, repeated engagement, or nuanced verbal and nonverbal behavior. This reflective practice fosters patience, attentiveness, and an understanding that connection is a dynamic process requiring observation, awareness, and thoughtful engagement. Ultimately, self-reflection empowers men to respond authentically